Susan Hensley, and I'm part of the workforce development team. And prior to my role at VDH, I worked as an emergency preparedness coordinator for a local health department in California for about 8 years or so. I've conducted multiple statewide medical health training exercises, as well as served as a healthcare preparedness coalition coordinator. And just during my time as a healthcare preparedness coalition coordinator, I was able to double the participants in the coalition, as well as use a lot of the skills dealing with volunteers in pods. So I'll be talking a little bit about my experience throughout the training today. So as we get started, if you could go ahead and just type in the chat, why are you interested in this training, and what are some key takeaways that you would like to gain from this training? And if Adrina, you can help me monitor the chat because I actually can't see it while presenting, that would be great. I would just like to know why people are taking this training or any takeaways. Hopefully we'll be able to cover some of those interests, and as well as cover some of the takeaways.
So no one is typing yet.
Okay.
Okay. Someone's saying, I'm interested in this training due to MRC engagement and retention with volunteers. Right now, their unit is pretty good, but they want to learn, things to make it even better.
All right. Perfect.
Interested in any opportunities for growth within this position, and looking from a new perspective to gain ideas. And again, engagement and retention is mentioned.
Okay, good. Great. Okay, I will cover some engagement and retention strategies as well.
Learning new strategies for improving quality of experience on behalf of the volunteers.
Okay.
Creating a sense of cohesiveness with large groups.
Okay.
Have a large number of volunteers that are good with deploying and want to keep their interests to go past just COVID.
Yeah.
Volunteering. Engagement and retention again is mentioned.
Great.
So I think those are the big ones, yeah.
Sounds good. All right, great. We will be covering some engagement and retention, so hopefully you will have some just tips that you can walk away with after this training. All right, so as we get started, we just had the Super Bowl, and I don't know which team y'all were rooting for, but really, as a sports team wins a championship, actually players and coaches, they often cite playing together as a cohesive unit or cohesive team as a key to their win. And through my years of emergency preparedness, I've experienced that kind of success as well. A successful response, usually it's possible because of a cohesive team. And I know some of you mentioned that as some takeaways that you would like. How do you strengthen your MRC unit? And strong teams, they really don't happen just because of qualified individuals, right? They happen through built activities that are designed to bring individuals together. Right. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of that today. And team building, it's any action or method which brings a group together and motivates them to work collaboratively, right? The purpose of any team building exercise is really to build that kind of stronger unit. And actually, large corporations, they're starting to really recognize the value of teams, right? Especially in our post-COVID just hybrid work. I know a lot of you also still have a lot of volunteers that you're trying to figure out how to keep them engaged. And actually, even these large companies, they say that people will actually stay at companies because of relationships and because of good teams in their experience. So even from a business perspective, team building actually has a lot of benefits, such as increases productivity, increases the employee motivation, encourages collaboration, builds trust and respect. And I think this is definitely true to volunteers as well. Volunteers, as we all know, they actually can do incredible things. And those incredible efforts are possible because of teamwork and just a passionate group of people who are always greater than the sum of their parts, right? And so why is team building important? Well, there's actually additional benefits for volunteers in team building because it can help reduce stress, right? Volunteering is actually a lot of hard work. And when someone is especially dedicating their free time outside of potentially a full-time job, it's crucial to find ways to relieve stress. And so team building can actually help reduce the stress of volunteers and make them happier, which means that they're more willing to do the task that you're asking them to do. It's also important because it'll unite your team under actually VDH's cause, right? So team building activities can actually help your volunteers just remind them about the organizational impact that they can have. But it also helps them to get to know who they'll be working with so that everyone can be more effective and engaged, especially if you can gather them before a response. Also, involving your volunteers in a mission through team building can significantly impact your organization's success, VDH's success, and it also helps with volunteer retention. Um, Believe it or not, an engaged workforce, and this is for those of staff that are paid, they have a 24% less turnover. And a committed volunteer group will actually continue to serve your organization for a long time. And we'll touch upon retention in a little bit in the training. A team building activity can also just help celebrate all of the progress that you've made together as a team. An important area of team building among volunteers is actually looking back on what you've already accomplished as an MRC group. And especially after a response, and I'm just thinking about COVID, it's been really long and drawn out. Maybe you might think about, planning a thank you event, for all the different volunteers and people who made the response successful. I know all of you work with actually a very limited budget. And especially in emergency preparedness, I know this is something that I've heard MRC units see, like even request for, if there's any additional funds so that they could even like put on something like this, but something to consider, right? And just really team building can really promote a lot of togetherness. Already when volunteers come together for a response, I think that already unites them because they're coming together to help with this particular cause. But also volunteers continue to contribute to this cause when they have friends that they're doing it together with. And so being able to kind of promote connectedness, which I know some of you mentioned in the chat in the beginning, are also very important. I know sometimes your volunteer needs are cyclical. And so trying to think of different ways that you can do a team building event, even in like the, off season. I know it's kind of hard to predict when an off season is, but it can actually help to maintain your bonds with the volunteers. And I know your MRC units, there's lots of exercises you guys already do throughout the year, a lot of opportunities to bring the volunteers together. So I'll talk a little bit about what you can do during utilizing those times that you're already bringing volunteers together to kind of build relationships and hopefully build some more connectedness. Especially if volunteers are engaged, they'll come back and they'll keep on wanting to volunteer. So to just give you guys some statistics, really ultimately, all of this team building, why are we doing it? Why do we care? It's really because we want to think about volunteer retention, right? It's really hard to build teams if volunteers are not coming back and staying and volunteering. And actually, according to the Corporation for National and Community Service, the average volunteer retention rate is 65%, which actually is not bad, but what that looks like is also 1 out of 3 of your volunteers will stop volunteering. So the various factors that could play into volunteer retention include, feelings of connectedness, volunteer morale, volunteer engagement, and all of these aspects could actually be addressed through different team building exercises. Really at the most basic and simplest level, volunteer retention is about making volunteers feel good about their assignment, about themselves, about volunteering with the organization. And if the experience is really satisfying and rewarding, volunteers will actually want to continue to participate. And this is even more true if the assigned tasks actually boosts their self-esteem. And when the volunteer experience pervades the volunteer program, a positive, enthusiastic climate is created, which then encourages people to continue to volunteer. And so actually coming from California into VDH, I was really impressed by all of the MRC units and the ways that you try to keep your volunteers engaged. And I actually heard about some MRC units utilizing their volunteers throughout the year when it's not a response to try to help out in various areas of VDH. Like I heard about an MRC unit, and I apologize, I don't remember exactly from which region, but I think they were using some of their MRC volunteers to help with like a records management, which is amazing because MRC units, a lot of the MRC volunteers, they're from a healthcare background. And so, all right, that's great. Yeah, so that to be able to kind of engage their volunteers in that way, I thought that was a great idea of just trying to find meaningful work for volunteers to do even outside of a response time. So that's just a small example. And I hope through today too, we can share some good ideas on how different MRC units are engaging their volunteers. So hopefully through today's training, I leave you with some practical tips. And I apologize, you will hear some repetitiveness, but I think there is some concepts that kind of carry throughout team building and connectedness and retention. So you'll hear some repetitive concepts, but really, we covered kind of understanding the importance of strong team. I'll go through various dimensions on how to enhance trust. What are some key foundations of strong teams so that you can build that into into your MRC units, as well as give you some of my favorite team building activities and activities that you can actually do on the spot and very quickly without a lot of time and money as well. All right. So before I dive directly into team building and giving you guys some practical tips, I think we actually need to spend some time talking about retention, building trust and connection. Because again, like I mentioned, having a constant turnover of volunteers is going to be pretty hard to build a team. So I actually want to start by watching this. Oh, I am so sorry. I don't know why that came up on the slide, but I am going to start with this video. All right, and hopefully we tested the audio and hopefully all of that works. So let me share this. All right, see that?
Yes, we're good.
Back in New York, I am the head of development for a nonprofit called Robin Hood. When I'm not fighting poverty, I'm fighting fires as the assistant captain of a volunteer fire company. Now, in our town, we're
I'm gonna just try restarting this, hopefully.
the volunteers supplement a highly skilled career staff. You have to get to the fire scene pretty early to get in on any action. I remember my first fire. Back in New York, I am the head of development for a nonprofit called Robin Hood. When I'm not fighting poverty, I'm fighting fires as the assistant captain of a volunteer fire company. Now, in our town, where the volunteers supplement a highly skilled career staff, You have to get to the fire scene pretty early to get in on any action. I remember my first fire. I was the second volunteer on the scene, so there was a pretty good chance I was going to get in. But still, it was a real foot race against the other volunteers to get to the captain in charge to find out what our assignments would be. When I found the captain, he was having a very engaging conversation with the homeowner, who was surely having one of the worst days of her life. Here it was, the middle of the night. She was standing outside in the pouring rain, under an umbrella, in her pajamas, barefoot, while her house was in flames. The other volunteer who had arrived just before me, let's call him Lex Luthor, got to the captain first and was asked to go inside and save the homeowner's dog. The dog. Oh, I was stunned with jealousy. Here was some lawyer or money manager who for the rest of his life gets to tell people that he went into a burning building to save a living creature. Just because he beat me by 5 seconds. Well, I was next. The captain weighed me over. Said, Bezos, I need you to go into the house. I need you to go upstairs, past the fire, and I need you to get this woman a pair of shoes. I swear. So, not exactly what I was hoping for, but off I went. Up the stairs, down the hall, past the real firefighters who were pretty much done putting out the fire at this point, into the master bedroom to get a pair of shoes. Now, I know what you're thinking, but I'm no hero. I carried my payload back downstairs where I met my nemesis and the precious dog by the front door. We took our treasures outside to the homeowner where, not surprisingly, his received much more attention than did mine. A few weeks later, the department received a letter from the homeowner thanking us for the valiant effort displayed in saving her home. The act of kindness she noted above all others, someone had even gotten her a pair of shoes. You know, in both my vocation at Robin Hood and my avocation as a volunteer firefighter, I am witness to acts of generosity and kindness on a monumental scale. But I'm also witness to acts of grace and courage on an individual basis. And you know what I've learned? They all matter. So as I look around this room at people who either have achieved or are on their way to achieving remarkable levels of success, I would offer this reminder. Don't wait. Don't wait until you make your first million to make a difference in somebody's life. If you have something to give it now. Serve food at a soup kitchen, clean up a neighborhood park, be a mentor. Not every day is going to offer us a chance to save somebody's life, but every day offers us an opportunity to affect one. So get in the game. Save the shoes. Thank you.
All right. Hopefully you guys were able to watch that video and not experience a lot of lag. Let me just switch back to my slideshow. All right. So why did I show this video about Mark Bezos? Well, it's because I think as MRC coordinators, it's really important to know a lot of the people that volunteer in your MRC units. It's because they want to make a difference, right? They're the people who want to save the shoes, so to speak, like Mark Bezos mentioned. And these volunteers, they work with you because they want to, not because they're getting paid or that they have to. And so knowing what actually motivates people to volunteer is really important, because that will help keep their passions alive. And keeping their passion alive is just crucial to keep your volunteers engaged. And the reasons they give to serve as vital motivational factors can help personalize their experience, and they then develop a more positive relationship with your organization, which again all contributes to volunteer retention. So So then, let's take some time to just pause and consider, right? There may be actually several reasons, whether personal or external, why someone might actually choose to stop volunteering. And I've experienced a number of them with volunteers that I've dealt with in the past as well. And so in order to increase volunteer retention, we have to really understand why volunteers leave so that you can actually create some actionable retention strategies. So I want to just take some time to just pause, and maybe you can jot down a couple of notes. But really, what is your MRC unit doing to keep volunteers motivated, fulfilled, and engaged? And how is your MRC unit retaining volunteers? Maybe if you don't have a strategy yet, I'm hoping that you can walk away with some takeaways after today's training to start developing a retention plan. So I'm just going to give you a minute to just write down some quick thoughts. You don't have to type it in the chat. This is just a self-reflection exercise. And then I'll come back.
Hey, Susan, we see several tabs open on your share screen, just to let you know.
Oh, do you see several tabs? Let me stop sharing for a second because I have one in presenter mode. Let's see. How about that, Virginia? Is that better?
Good. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So I know that wasn't much time, but hopefully that's kind of just gets your brain flowing on some things that you can do to think about as you retain volunteers. So some examples that I thought of why volunteers stop volunteering include things like time constraints. Like we know a lot of our volunteers have full-time jobs, so that might be an issue. Or they have, a lot of just personal reasons, like they might be a single parent and they're volunteering. Sometimes it could be because they have unaligned or they're actually lacking skill sets and experience. So they felt uncomfortable, because maybe the role that we gave them was outside of their comfort zone. It could be that they are disconnected from the cause, or they just have lack of, inspiration. There could be some reasons why we used to have some students volunteer because they needed to fulfill a requirement. And once that requirement was fulfilled, they stopped volunteering. And then I think most recently we've experienced a lot of burnout. I think from COVID, a lot of people, they are really excited about volunteering, really wanting to make a difference. And then as the response kind of dragged on, they feel burnt out. They don't want to volunteer anymore. But some other reasons that I've discovered is it could be because of something within the organization that is lacking. So for example, it could be things like engagement or excitement. Maybe the volunteers are way more excited than the organization is. And because of that mismatch, they don't want to volunteer anymore. Or they're lacking connection with the organization or with other volunteers. Maybe they feel underappreciated. Maybe there's not very clear goals or connection to why they're doing what they're doing. Or it could even be that there aren't any new opportunities or experiences. It kind of feels like the same old, and so they lose interest. Or it could be that there's just lack of communication and follow-up after they volunteered. So these are just kind of different reasons that I found through the years, right? And depending on kind of your retention strategies, you can actually address some of these reasons, which then ensures kind of a better volunteer experience for all of your volunteers. And this training isn't necessarily a like how to retain volunteers training, but again, I wanted to give some ideas because I think it's completely related to team building. And hopefully you can implement some of these ideas. So just some tips that I wanted to give all of you for retention, and you'll find some overlap with team building. But it's to first start off by being realistic about your expectations and to set actionable goals for your volunteers, right? You want them to experience kind of realistic expectations and actionable goals, which will help them to just be successful, right, in providing service, as well as allow them to have the greatest impact. And so just wanted to give you a couple of questions that you can think through when creating some actionable goals for your volunteers. So, do the volunteers understand the mission and values of our MRC unit? I see that we have an MRC website and there's mission and values on there, but do the volunteers really understand what that looks like on a practical level? Right? Do the volunteers understand the goals and objectives of the opportunity that they're volunteering for? Are the goals provided for them like SMART goals, meaning they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound? And I find that we do a really good job when we're giving our volunteers just-in-time training. The various training that we give them is something that's is smart, right? They can follow these various tips and complete, their mission or their goal for that opportunity. So something to think about are the goals of all of your volunteer opportunities aligned, right? Are the goals provided to the volunteer within their comfort zone? And then do volunteers understand which tasks are a priority? And the reason why I put that question in there too is because that could actually minimize a lot of frustration that you have with your volunteers if you could if you can clearly communicate to the volunteers up front, okay, these are the tasks that are most important. You give them a whole list of tasks, and sometimes if they're just coming in for the first time, they don't know how to prioritize which tasks are more important. So being able to clearly communicate that could actually help reduce frustration. The next tip is to give volunteers the training and resources that they need. So again, there are so many trainings, even that I found on the MRC website, a lot of recorded trainings, and they really range the gamut from like fit testing to self-care. But one thing that and this is just because I'm not sure how the MRC units exactly work at VDH, but just wanted to ask all of you if you have like a volunteer onboarding process or like an orientation that you give, and maybe Adriana can jump in on this too, but sometimes I experience for volunteers that are just volunteering for like a pod for the first time, for example, we don't really have an extensive volunteer onboarding and orientation process. That's our just-in-time training. They get checked in, they meet with their team leaders, and then they go ahead and do their just-in-time training. But for some of our MRC volunteers that we're trying to retain for a longer period of time, maybe a more extensive onboarding process and orientation can actually make them feel feel like they kind of belong to our organization, which they are, right? Our volunteers are what make our MRC units. Okay, so Adriana said there is like an onboarding process, but essentially what the whole point of this tip is to help volunteers feel prepared and qualified. We want them to feel like we're setting them up for success, right? Just like if they were paid staff, we want to make them feel like they could use their skills to really contribute to our organization, and that their actions can make an impact. And providing them with a lot of training and resources could really help them to feel that way, right? One thing that I really liked for brand new volunteers that were just that I was meeting for the first time at a pod, for example, was just the what is, I call it the 3-step model. I'm sure there's another way to explain this, but it's the step 1 is like, watch me do it. Then step 2 is we do it together. And then step 3 is I watch you do it. And in that way, I feel like within these 3 steps, volunteers feel a lot more confident to go and complete the task that I'm asking them to do. So that's just a quick tip. Tip 3 is to get to know them personally. This can actually really help you as an MRC coordinator know the strengths of your volunteers. Nobody wants to engage with an organization that's dry, that doesn't communicate with their volunteers in a humanistic way. And I'm not saying that you all don't either, but really trying to get to know your volunteers and build relationships with them could really help just boost their morale. Because again, they want to build friendships, they want to get to know each other, so that they can actually feel more strongly about your mission and why they're volunteering. And as you get to know your volunteers, the reason why this is important is because it leads into the next tip is maybe you can move some of your volunteers into greater leadership roles, right? Generally, when I interact with volunteers, I find that there's some that really stand out. They know what they're doing. They know how to like command a crowd. And maybe some of these volunteers, they might start out as just like, for example, a vaccinator. But if they have a lot of leadership and they have their credentials, maybe they can actually move into a lead vaccinator role, for example. Other ways, I just find that you can ask your volunteers about, just feedback. I know we're really good at kind of giving like surveys to our volunteers, giving them feedback. We do hot washes after exercises and pods and everything like that. But even throughout the process, kind of talking to your volunteers and saying, okay, well, what can we improve? What can we do to make things better? Can also help them just enjoy their volunteer experience. Other things that we've done is to respect their value and time by actually writing thank you notes. I know you might have tons of volunteers and that's not always possible, but even just sending out an email at the end, just saying that you were so grateful for just their hard work and in which they came, and showing just that appreciation could actually serve as a very valuable resource. And another thing that VDH that I've seen is really great at doing is doing all these volunteer shout outs. So just want to encourage you all to keep doing that, to make sure like your volunteers that are really outstanding in your MRC units, they get posted on the VDH website, they get posted on social media. It's just a way for the organization to actually appreciate all the hard work that our volunteers are doing. The last one, I know might seem kind of a weird tip, but like know when to stop. And the reason why I say know when to stop is because I know I've been to some exercises and even pods where we have so many volunteers. And volunteer time is really valuable. And it's great that we have so many people who want to volunteer with us. But then when we have so many volunteers that we don't have enough meaningful work to give to them, I think oftentimes they feel like they're standing around and then they feel like they're wasting their time. So it's really important as MRC coordinators, I think, to know, well, what's a realistic number of volunteers to accept for a certain response or a, even like an exercise. And I think that's why doing drills is so important, because then you get kind of a good gauge of how many volunteers is actually realistic to accomplish a certain task. And of course, all of this is scalable. It really depends on the incident and the response, but being able to kind of know how many volunteers is realistic will just help people so that they're not, standing around not doing anything. All right. So I wanted to go a little bit into communication, just because as MRC coordinators, you're going to have to communicate a lot of things to your volunteers. And being able to communicate clearly and understandably will make a big difference in supporting your teams. And I think that's all really obvious, but again, it just goes without saying that the more effective the communication, the more successful you will be as an MRC coordinator. And so I know there's a lot of things you probably need to communicate to your volunteers. Some things that I thought of. So go ahead and type in the chat if there's some things that you need to communicate to your MRC unit. But just some things that I thought of were like, your actionable goals. What's realistic? What are some of the priorities that you have? Oftentimes you're the one giving the guidance, the support, the encouragement. You need to delegate tasks to your team members. Sometimes you have to give constructive feedback. There's times when you have to ask for ideas, suggestions, and then you have to be able to like motivate, inspire your teams, but also to give them recognition when recognition is due. And to make this even more complicated, sometimes you have to do all of these things when it's high stress, high stakes in an emergency response situation. And so I get it. It's all these different things that kind of come together, especially when there's a big response that we have to bring our volunteers into. But really, hopefully, at least as we're realistic about some of these scenarios and these situations, it'll help us to kind of preemptively think about what are the best ways that we can communicate to our team. All right, so moving right along, without trust, there is no team, right? And so this next section, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to build trust and how to build just connections with your teams. So hopefully I'm going to try to do another video. This one is a little bit longer, but this one kind of goes into the heart of just an aspect of leadership that I hope all of you can kind of walk away with. So let me share my screen again. Hopefully you can all see that. And
September 8th, 2009. On that day, a column of American and Afghan troops were making their way through a part of Afghanistan to help protect a group of government officials, a group of Afghan government officials who'd be meeting with some local village elders. The column came under ambush and was surrounded on 3 sides. And amongst many other things, Captain Swenson was recognized for running into live fire to rescue the wounded and pull out the dead. One of the people he rescued was a sergeant, and he and a comrade were making their way to a medevac helicopter. And what was remarkable about this day is, by sheer coincidence, one of the medevac medics happened to have a GoPro camera on his helmet and captured the whole scene on camera. It shows Captain Swenson and his comrade bringing this wounded soldier who'd received a gunshot to the neck. They put him in the helicopter, and then you see Captain Swenson bend over and give him a kiss before he turns around to rescue more. I saw this, and I thought to myself, where do people like that come from? What is that? That is some deep, deep emotion when you would want to do that. There's a love there. And I want to know, why is it that I don't have people that I work with like that? You know, in the military, they give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that others may gain. In business, we give bonuses to people who are willing to sacrifice others so that we may gain. Yeah. Right? So I asked myself, where do people like this come from? And my initial conclusion was that they're just better people. That's why they're attracted to the military. These better people are attracted to this concept of service. But that's completely wrong. What I learned is that it's the environment. And if you get the environment right, every single one of us has the capacity to do these remarkable things. And more importantly, others have that capacity too. I've had the great honor of getting to meet some of these who we would call heroes, who've put themselves and put their lives at risk to save others. And I asked them, why would you do it? Why did you do it? And they all say the same thing: because they would have done it for me. It's this deep sense of trust and cooperation. So trust and cooperation are really important here. The problem with concepts of trust and cooperation is that they are feelings, they're not instructions. I can't simply say to you, trust me, and you will. I can't simply instruct 2 people to cooperate, and they will. It's not how it works. It's a feeling. So where does that feeling come from? If you go back 50,000 years to the Paleolithic era, to the early days of Homo sapien, what we find is that the world was filled with danger. All of these forces working very, very hard to kill us. Nothing personal. Whether it was the weather, lack of resources, maybe a saber-toothed tiger, all of these things working to reduce our lifespan. And so we evolved into social animals. where we lived together and worked together in what I call a circle of safety, inside the tribe, where we felt like we belong. And when we felt safe amongst our own, the natural reaction was trust and cooperation. There are inherent benefits to this. It means I can fall asleep at night and trust that someone from within my tribe will watch for danger. If we don't trust each other, if I don't trust you, that means you won't watch for danger. Bad system of survival. The modern day is exactly the same thing. The world is filled with danger, things that are trying to frustrate our lives or reduce our success, reduce our opportunity for success. It could be the ups and downs of an economy, the uncertainty of the stock market. It could be a new technology that renders your business model obsolete overnight. Or it could be your competition that is sometimes trying to kill you. It's sometimes trying to put you out of business, but at the very minimum is working hard to frustrate your growth and steal your business from you. We have no control over these forces. These are a constant and they're not going away. The only variable are the conditions inside the organization. And that's where leadership matters, because it's the leader that sets the tone. When a leader makes the choice to put the safety and lives of the people inside the organization first, to sacrifice their comforts and sacrifice the tangible results so that the people remain and feel safe and feel like they belong, remarkable things happen. I was flying on a trip, and I was witness to an incident where a passenger attempted to board before their number was called. And I watched the gate agent treat this man like he had broken the law, like a criminal. He was yelled at for attempting to board one group too soon. So I said something. I said, why do you have to treat us like cattle? Why can't you treat us like human beings? And this is exactly what she said to me. She said, sir, if I don't follow the rules, I could get in trouble or lose my job. All she was telling me is that she doesn't feel safe. All she was telling me is that she doesn't trust her leaders. The reason we like flying Southwest Airlines is not because they necessarily hire better people, it's because they don't fear their leaders. You see, if the conditions are wrong, we're forced to expend our own time and energy to protect ourselves from each other. And that inherently weakens the organization. When we feel safe inside the organization, we will naturally combine our talents and our strengths and work tirelessly to face the dangers outside and seize the opportunities. The closest analogy I can give to what a great leader is like being a parent. If you think about what being a great parent is, what do you want? What makes a great parent? We want to give our child opportunities, education, discipline them when necessary, all so that they can grow up and achieve more than we could for ourselves. Great leaders want exactly the same thing. They want to provide their people opportunity, education, discipline when necessary, build their self-confidence, give them the opportunity to try and fail, all so that they could achieve more than we could ever imagine for ourselves. Charlie Kim, who's the CEO of a company called NextJump in New York City, a tech company, he makes the point that if you had hard times in your family, would you ever consider laying off one of your children? We would never do it. Then why do we consider laying off people inside our organization? Charlie implemented a policy of lifetime employment. If you get a job at NextJump, you cannot get fired for performance issues. In fact, if you have issues, they will coach you and they will give you support, just like we would with one of our children who happens to come home with a C from school. It's the complete opposite. This is the reason so many people have such a visceral hatred, sort of anger at some of these banking CEOs with their disproportionate salaries and bonus structures. It's not the numbers. It's that they have violated the very definition of leadership. They have violated this deep-seated social contract. We know that they allowed their people to be sacrificed so that they could protect their own interests. Or worse, they sacrificed their people to protect their own interests. This is what so offends us, not the numbers. Would anybody be offended if we gave a $150 million bonus to Gandhi? How about a $250 million bonus to Mother Teresa? Do we have an issue with that? None at all. None at all. Great leaders would never sacrifice the people to save the numbers. They would sooner sacrifice the numbers to save the people. Bob Chapman, who runs a large manufacturing company in the Midwest called Barry Waymiller, in 2008, he was hit very hard by the recession, and they lost 30% of their orders overnight. Now, in a large manufacturing company, this is a big deal. and they could no longer afford their labor pool. They needed to save $10 million. So, like so many companies today, the board got together and discussed layoffs. And Bob refused. You see, Bob doesn't believe in head counts. Bob believes in heart counts. And it's much more difficult to simply reduce the heart count. And so they came up with a furlough program. Every employee from secretary to CEO was required to take 4 weeks of unpaid vacation. They could take it any time they wanted, and they did not have to take it consecutively. But it was how Bob announced the program that mattered so much. He said, it's better that we should all suffer a little than any of us should have to suffer a lot. And morale went up. They saved $20 million. And most importantly, as would be expected, when the people feel safe and protected by the leadership in the organization, the natural reaction is to trust and cooperate. And quite spontaneously, nobody expected, people started trading with each other. Those who could afford it more would trade with those who could afford it less. People would take 5 weeks so that somebody else only had to take 3. Leadership is a choice. It is not a rank. I know many people at the senior-most levels of organizations who are absolutely not leaders. They are authorities, and we do what they say because they have authority over us, but we would not follow them. And I know many people who are at the bottoms of organizations who have no authority, and they are absolutely leaders. And this is because they have chosen to look after the person to the left of them, and they have chosen to look after the person to the right of them. This is what a leader is. I heard a story of some Marines who were out in theater, and as is the Marine custom, the officer ate last, and he let his men eat first. And when they were done, there was no food left for him. And when they went back out in the field, his men brought him some of their food so that he may eat. Because that's what happens. We call them leaders because they go first. We call them leaders because they take the risk before anybody else does. We call them leaders because they will choose to sacrifice so that their people may be safe and protected, and so their people may gain. And when we do, the natural response is that our people will sacrifice for us. They will give us their blood and sweat and tears to see that their leader's vision comes to life. And when we ask them, why would you do that? Why would you give your blood and sweat and tears for that person? They all say the same thing. Because they would have done it for me. And isn't that the organization we would all like to work in? Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, so I'm just gonna switch. All right, so as I get my slides pulled up, why don't we just type into the chat some takeaways from this video? So I personally love Simon Sinek. He is one of the leading experts on just leadership. And I thought it was very relevant to show this TED Talk to all of you, particularly just because as MRC coordinators, you all have a big part in how your MRC units feel. Just even setting that environment and that tone for all of them, and trying to figure out how you could kind of create a so-called like tribe or family unit within your MRC group will highly increase the retention rate of your volunteers. as you build trust, as you foster these connections, and you make them feel like a part of, the VDH family, then I think you'll be able to retain your volunteers and then, continue to build the team. And so I know some of you might be thinking, okay, Susan, you don't get it. Like there's all these challenges that we have with building trust and connection. And maybe that's why you're here too. And I totally get it. Some of the challenges that I've encountered include like, again, just constant turnover, and just some volunteers that are only interested in serving during emergencies, and they have very little interaction with us outside of the response times, right? Like you might send an email for something like for another kind of exercise or another opportunity, and they just don't respond to you. There's many volunteers that have day jobs, so their time is very limited. They might not be, like I said, responsive or even committed after the emergency is over. And my biggest challenge that I had when I was a volunteer coordinator was just keeping their contact info updated. Like, how do you even communicate with them if they constantly change cell phones and emails and you don't have their updated contact information? So there's like a whole host of other challenges that I'm sure all of you encounter. And all of that really takes a toll on even your morale as an MRC coordinator. And that then could affect your team morale. But again, I think one antidote to some of these challenges, and I see in the chat that some of your volunteers, the best part of volunteers is that they're very intrinsically motivated, right? Yeah, again, like they want to volunteer because they feel like it's the right thing to do and they really want to contribute, and that's amazing. And so we want to continue to foster that. And so building trust. Okay, so starting out with the basics, what is the definition of trust? It's assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. It's to place your confidence in. And really, this is the foundation of the relationship between a leader and a follower, right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do as an MRC coordinator, and what are some of these dimensions of trust that you can build for yourself in order to build trust amongst your teams. So there's 5 dimensions of trust. The first one is integrity. And all of you probably know what the definition of integrity is, but being able to be completely whole in that how you act when no one is watching is the same as when someone is watching. And people who have integrity, they're very transparent, they take accountability for their actions, and they work hard to really help their organization as much as they would just for themselves, right? The other dimension is competence, right? You need to have a certain level of technical and interpersonal knowledge and skills, right? You need to be able to show that you are competent in a number of areas. Like if a volunteer comes and asks you a question, maybe you don't know that question, the answer to that question right away, but it's being able to show, well, these are the other strengths that you have and other skills that you have. Consistency. It's being someone who is reliable, predictable, and have good judgment, right? It's that feeling that you are a leader who is safe, right? That you can be consistent in your behaviors and your actions, which fosters trust. The other one is loyalty. And I think this one's really important. And I think Simon Sinek in his video, he was touching upon this, right? But being able to protect and being able to like save face for a person, right? That employees and volunteers who feel safe, feel like their leaders are for them, who are really for their good, they're going to want to do the same for you, right? And then the last dimension is openness, right? Being willing to share ideas, information, but also being willing to be transparent. Being transparent just adds to your credibility as a leader, actually. So on the next 2 slides, I have some trust builders and trust busters. So these might all be obvious to you, but again, I just wanted to lay it all out, that these are some of the do's for trust building. So ask and listen, you want to share, acknowledge, help one another, value, disclose information, collaborate, support, recognize, and discuss. But some trust busters are assuming or punishing, abdicating, intimidating. And I'm not going to read all of these things, but the reason why I put this on here is to just keep it at the forefront of our minds, right? And I know sometimes, even in really stressful situations, you might see some of these trust busters happening as you respond. So, how do we enhance trust on our teams? So, again, I apologize if this is repetitive, but there are a lot of just common themes throughout all of this. And so the first one is to just provide opportunities to build relationship. Just to note here, yeah, trust, as much as we want it and we want to be these people who can build trust, it does actually take time. But creating these kinds of opportunities for the teams to meet face to face. This can be even over Zoom. This could be in person. You really have to cater it to each of your MRC units' specific needs. But this really helps build relationships. It also helps them to, get to know one another as before an event occurs. The other thing is networking opportunities. So this is where it's important to kind of get to know your volunteers. Some people might be volunteering because they're looking for a job. Maybe they want to see if they jive well with the organization. And so, or maybe you talk to them and they really hate their jobs and they're trying to find a way to get out. And being able to provide them kind of even these network opportunities like, hey, there's these job openings that VDH that we think would be a great fit, or at these local health districts, this might be a good fit for you. Even something that you wouldn't maybe consider a networking opportunity would be, there was something that we tried where we had a vaccination lead give a presentation. And I think this was like a really short, like lunch and learn presentation. It was like a 15-minute presentation just on tips and tricks with vaccinating kids. You would think that this wouldn't be something that would be hugely valued, like hugely attended, but actually there were a lot of people who showed up because we go to these vaccination pods and we see kids screaming their head off. So this one vaccination lead had a great experience. She came from like a peds background, but she was like, well, these are some of the things that I do to make the kids calm down so that they can get vaccinated, and it just calms down the parents. And it was just a really well received opportunity, and that helped to actually build relationships with amongst all the other vaccinators. So that's just a quick example. Another way is to speak the truth, right? So leaders can really model trust, accountability by just responding to questions in a really honest and complete manner, right? Your volunteers might have tons of questions for you, and you might not know exactly all the answers, but being able to be balanced in your communicating so that they could feel like, oh yeah, I can really trust this person, right? They give me an honest answer. And yeah, it is important for you to know how to balance communication. I know there's some things that you can't always disclose to your volunteers, but just being able to kind of learn like what is that good balance between the information that you can disclose and the information that you can't. The next one is just highlight successes, right? Again, like a proven track record of successes is one of the biggest indicators of credibility to other team members as well. So you could do things like encouraging your team members to share wins through emails, during meetings, again, on social media pages, and just even having like showcasing like best practices. These are the things that we tried and they worked really well. And I think that really helps to build trust. And then and then just again, the last one is just admit when you don't know something, right? It goes back into the transparency issue, but a few things shut down communication and trust more than just a know-it-all, pretending like you know it all even though you don't have the answers. And I think people can really see through that. So really being transparent can really help. All right, so I'm going to move on to just the importance of feeling connected. I know that was some of the things that you all mentioned of wanting to, how do you build that sense of connection? And it's very interesting. So it's the psychologist William Glasser. He says that the need for connection often exceeds the need to survive. And that sense of identification with a work group, a volunteer group, could really meet this need for a lot of individuals, and it'll make them feel happier. They have a positive connection with your organization, with your MRC unit, and they'll want to volunteer again. But before I go more in depth into this, I think we need to talk about some of the ways that we actually maybe inadvertently make volunteers feel disconnected. And so I wanted to go through some of that, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but as I go through these various things that kind of disconnect volunteers, it's just an opportunity to kind of reflect on your MRC unit. Is there any of this happening, even inadvertently, that might be causing disconnection with your volunteers? So one thing that I observed before, and this is not VDH experiences, this is just in California and something that I've seen. It's just even differences in resources. So you might think this is kind of obvious, and a lot of the times this is already in our like volunteer manuals, but I've been to pods before where, there's no designated even like parking for volunteers, to just give you an example. So, the staff that come to help out in the pod, they have designated parking, but the volunteers are just expected to park with the public. And even something like that could cause actually inadvertently disconnection, right? The volunteers, when they come to a pod, they're kind of treated like staff, or they should be. And so just to even have like designated parking or designated staff break rooms that they're able to go to take a break, something like that. Differences in access to information. So this is something where, again, it takes kind of discernment and wisdom, but I find that a lot of the times, management, they rarely share information about problems or new directions with volunteers, even though these volunteers might have volunteered in your organization for a while. But being removed from the transmission of this information can actually make your volunteers feel very separate, right? Especially if these volunteers might hold leadership positions within within your organization as a volunteer, right? Whether they're pod managers or leads of something, right? So being able to kind of communicate some of that information, to the volunteers could really help. So this is another one, differences in authority. So I think oftentimes volunteers are given very little freedom to make decisions. And I get it. Some volunteers, you don't want them to make decisions, but sometimes this is actually exacerbated by just lack of direction and information, right? If volunteer jobs are designed so that volunteers can have clear goals to achieve, they can actually be encouraged to come up with some new approaches in achieving them, especially if they're a volunteer that has volunteered for your unit for a while and you can trust them. Then to give them a little bit of just ability to improve the situation, right? Versus saying like, okay, no, you can't, all the decisions have to go through me, for example. Different rules. So again, this is maybe speaking, not knowing exactly how the various MRC units here, but there are certain rules that are held by the agency, such as code of conduct or behavior. And I feel like those same rules should be applied to the volunteers because the volunteers represent the agency. And so being able to carry those similar rules can help you view volunteers in such a way that like, hey, you represent our agency, right? When you volunteer for our unit. But having that if you don't apply those same rules of your staff to your volunteers, it can cause disconnection. And then lastly, it's just differences in expectation. Really to foster self-esteem and connectedness of volunteers, I think it's really important that you hold volunteers to the same standard as your agency. Again, they represent you as an agency. And so being able to, from the very beginning, kind of let volunteers know, hey, this is our expectation as a volunteer You're representing VDH, right? You're representing our MRC unit, and to give them kind of that elevated view of even themselves as a volunteer. All right. So how can we create a positive sense of connection? I think we really underestimate our volunteer input. So being able to have volunteers come in, they have a fresh look at the situation and how we operate. So it's important to, really have our volunteers give input, right? Whether this is this could even be like a volunteer satisfaction survey. I'm not sure if you've done anything like that before, but it can include questions like, well, how do you rate your overall experience as a volunteer? How likely would you recommend our volunteer program to your friends and family, right? Do you feel valued as a volunteer at an organization? Do you feel appreciated as a volunteer of our organization? And do you plan to continue to volunteer with our organization? And hopefully you'll have volunteers, especially if you do it anonymously, you'll have volunteers hopefully give you really frank and direct answers that'll help you evaluate your MRC unit to see if there's any ways that you can improve, right? The other one is listen and learn. So as great as surveys are, and we know that sometimes volunteers don't really fill out surveys, but hopefully there's opportunities, especially as an MRC coordinator, where you can just boost morale by being that listening ear that is willing to learn how they're experiencing your organization from their level, right? And this doesn't have to be something that takes tons of time, but really something just even as an MRC coordinator to walk around, during an exercise or during a response, and to check in with your volunteers, to listen to, maybe even some of their frustrations, and to really learn from that, to take that back and to process that as an MRC coordinator so that you can improve the next time. Another thing is to create a mutually validating climate. And what I mean by this is really praising a person's positive characteristics. This is why it's important as an MRC coordinator to actually walk around, to get to know your volunteers, to say things like, wow, I admire your work ethic. Like, I really appreciate the way that you stayed calm, even while dealing with that, frustrated client, or you handled that situation so well. I really appreciate it. Different things like that. And as different people hear you using that validating and positive, phrases, it'll hopefully encourage the rest of them to continue to, validate one another and to, kind of have that positive feedback loop. And then the last one is just to communicate your volunteers' contributions, right? When work is done well, really as MRC coordinators, you should really compliment the volunteer who accomplished it and continue to spread all of the positive volunteer achievements that your MRC volunteers are doing. And some of the things that I didn't list on this slide, but some things that you can create positive connection is addressing volunteers by name. I know that's probably really obvious, but it's actually the most fundamental way of producing connectedness. Especially if this volunteer comes back for the second time, third time, knowing them by name can make them feel like, hey, I'm part of the team. They remember who I am. Keeping volunteers informed. Again, being able to let them know kind of like what's going on in the agency, what are changes that are happening, what are things that we are doing differently this time because of feedback that we've gotten, things like that. All right. I'm just going to wrap up our presentation now, hopefully summarizing some of these ideas that we've covered so far. So if I talked too fast and you didn't get anything else from all the other slides, hopefully these next 8 steps can just kind of help you hone down on how to build a stronger team with your MRC unit. So again, high performing teams, they don't materialize out of the air. And I think that's why you are all here attending this training, because you want to learn, okay, well, what are some of the steps that you can take to cultivate this sense of team amongst your MRC units. So here are some tips. Okay, establish your expectations from day one. I've been talking about expectations and all of that because if you have realistic expectations, your expectations are clear to your volunteers, it can really minimize a lot of the frustration you might feel. So really let them know some ground rules, right? And this doesn't mean just even rules that you expect from them when they show up at a clinic or show up at an exercise, but even like how you want the team to function in terms of the environment. Like, hey, this is, I treat this unit as like a family. We're going to watch out for each other. We're here for each other. So being able to even state that from the very beginning could help establish just clear expectations. All right, the next one is to respect your team members as individuals, right? So a robust team environment, it really blossoms when the individuals are honored and respected for their unique gifts. And I think a lot of your volunteers actually have a lot of skills that they can contribute, right, to your MRC unit. And, you know, I think one thing that sometimes we forget is that our volunteers, they have a very rich and varied life, right? They come from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of skill sets. And so again, getting to know your team and getting to know the members of your team as individuals, you can gain a better picture of that whole person. And it allows you to connect with them, to their interests, to their passions. And then you can kind of build relationships, you know, with the individuals of your MRC unit. All right, so as you get to know them, it helps to then build connections with the team, right? If you can see like, oh, this volunteer has all of these different interests and it's very similar to this volunteers, and to be able to establish those kinds of connections so that they could, you know, get to know one another and maybe even form those bonds of friendship. But it's also important that you try to help create and foster these connections as much as possible. And I'm going to go through some quick, even like icebreaker activities that you can do so that the volunteers feel comfortable, even like getting to know other volunteers and creating that kind of connected network. All right, so practice emotional intelligence. So great leaders, they understand that that not every person is motivated by the same thing. So, you know, I talked a little bit about in the beginning of knowing why your volunteers are volunteering. I think that's really important to know what's motivating them. What is, you know, do they have the same like goals? Do they like competition? Maybe you can even do like an MRC unit competition between another MRC unit. I don't know, like different people thrive on different things. So being able to understand that, you know, different people have different work styles, different motivations. And so being able to kind of learn what those are for your volunteers could really help in trying to foster like connection. All right, motivate with positivity. Again, another very obvious thing, but you would be surprised on how many people don't practice this skill enough, right? So again, create this positive environment in your MRC unit, right? Cite behaviors and events that you particularly liked, and really encourage your team. Like bring more of where that came from, right? I really loved how you guys worked hard, you worked fast, you know, things like that, and kind of like reinforce this their positive behavior. All right, we're almost there. So tip 6 is to communicate, right? As humans, we actually all love to know where we stand. And we want to know, like, are people happy with the work that I'm doing? Do I need to improve on something? And really, you shouldn't assume that people know, right? If they can sense that you're unhappy, but you don't say anything, that can really cause a lot of disconnection. So being able to, right, overly communicate with your volunteers, saying, yeah, what you did there was great. And the method that I like to do, especially when giving feedback, is to sandwich it, you know, like start out with like a positive thing that you're noticing, put the negative feedback in the middle, and then sandwich it again, close up that sandwich with another like positive behavior that you noticed. And in that way, I find that people are more receptive to feedback if you kind of sandwich the not so good feedback in the middle. All right, and tip 7 is look for ways to reward good work. So Adrenia said that, yeah, VDH, you guys do a lot already, like pins and certificates. I know you guys already post really great work that your volunteers are doing on the website. Just keep that up and look for other ways that you can reward good work. You know, maybe it'll be at the like preparedness summit. You can like highlight, yeah, these outstanding MRC units or something, or take that time to just have our volunteers stand up, give them a round of applause for all the hard work that they do. Sometimes it's even like awarding your MRC units with being able to attend the summit for free. I don't know, that's a monetary thing and a grant budget thing, but that's just kind of an example of some things you can do to just reward the good work that they're doing. And lastly, it's diversify. I know you don't always have a choice on this because the volunteers are just the volunteers that you get, but it really helps to have kind of a diverse group of individuals because it just helps to build connections, build teams, build a variety of skills if you have a diverse group of folks who can come together. I know it also poses challenges when you're very diverse, but when you have these different backgrounds, really the goal is to cover some of your blind spots. And I think that having a diverse team could actually help you meet the needs of your community a lot better when you have a variety of people from a variety of different backgrounds. All right, so now down to the nitty gritty. Okay, so what are some of the team building activities that have worked for me that I've liked? And I know we have about like maybe 10 minutes left, so I'll definitely leave time for questions. But these are some of my like go-to team building activities. So there's tons of quizzes online, like Myers-Briggs Enneagrams that you can even print out, have your volunteers do. It's like 5 minutes or less, but it just helps them to get to know one another because they know these different personalities. So that's the Myers-Briggs Enneagram. Another one that I mentioned are lunch and learns. This all depends on the time that you have with your volunteers and how committed your volunteers are. But even sharing like skills that volunteers might know to share with the group, or best practices or something you can highlight during lunch and learns. The other one that I like to do is 5-minute department program intros. Sometimes your volunteers, they don't know a lot about an MRC unit, or they signed up to volunteer, they went through all the background checks, but they don't really know much about your organization. This would be a good way to just kind of give them a broad overview, or like, hey, this is how our organization works, and these are the important people in our organization, for example. One that's a really quickie, you can do this over Zoom, you can do this in person, you can do it as a team lead when you're actually at an exercise or like a volunteer situation, but it's called High, Low, and Buffalo. It's where you share a high that you're experiencing right now, a low point, and then Buffalo is just something random about yourself that you want to share with the group. That's one. One that I really love is rate 1 to 5. So what that means is like, it can be rate yourself 1 to 5 on how you're doing personally, whether 1 being, okay, I need some grace, I'm going through some crazy stuff at home personally, all the way to 5, I'm ready to work. I have no issues, I'm excited to be here, I'm ready to go, right? So that's just an example of, rating 1 to 5. And it can be a variety of different categories, from personal to work to, how you're feeling, your energy level, all sorts of things. Another really quick one that I highly encourage, especially as you're trying to get to know the names of your volunteers, is this first letter of the first name descriptive adjective. It's way more complicated than it actually sounds, but just for example, my name is Susan, so I would pick an adjective that starts with an S that describes me. So usually the one that I go by is like Sassy Susan, and it feels like you get to know your volunteers a little bit more about them and you remember their name because it's a good alliteration. So that's one that I really like. If you have a little more time on your hands and you have volunteers that are willing to kind of hang out outside of a response, these are some of the things that I thought about, right? You can have holiday lunches or dinners, and especially utilizing these opportunities to like recognize your volunteers. Another one that I really like is just like bring your own lunch, right? Sometimes you can have volunteers come by and just help you do some work in the office if they're available. But bring your own lunch and use that as an opportunity to get to know one another. It's a downtime that you can have, and yeah, just to kind of build relationships. Another one, if you have a lot of time, well, not a lot of time, but more time than the other icebreakers that I mentioned, are blind directions. So I really love this one as a team building exercise. It's where you you're instructing someone else on like how to make a PB&J sandwich, for example. Or this other one is called a marshmallow tower. If you have time, I encourage you to Google it. But it's where different organizations during team building exercise, they've given people spaghetti noodles, uncooked spaghetti noodles and a marshmallow, and they need to build a tower to hold up the marshmallow. But as people work together and do these team building exercises, you kind of see how different people work. So it is very valuable if you have the time. The other one is 2 truths and a lie, and that's a quick way to get to know people as well, where they say 2 truths about themselves and a lie. You're supposed to kind of guess what the lie is, but this is another quick one, and I'm often surprised at the 2 truths that people say, because I always think that, oh no, that's the lie, but you would be surprised at what people share. And so yeah, those are some of the things that I recommend. That I've done all these team building exercises, and they're really great to get to know your team. All right, so with a few remaining minutes left, I just want to leave it open for questions.